My brother is also Godamo.
It's now my immense pleasure to welcome Stefano Boeri back. He inaugurated the session on tomorrow and will now tell us more about what tomorrow really is. Stefano, this is tomorrow.
So the idea was to do a sort of domino conversation, and let's start. The introduction we did half an hour ago, I was saying that what we starting now is in a way related to what you did 13 years ago. I remember very well, it was in July, and we were in an island in the south of Japan, it was Kitakyushu. And the idea was in that case to gather a bunch of thinkers of different disciplines, but basically the point was the relation between art and science. And with one of our best friends, you tried to make all of us observe the same subject, the same topic from different perspectives, from different points of view. And well, I think that that moment, 13 years ago in Japan, in an island of Japan, was really a starting point of many other attempts to bridge the gap through conversation. Because what I think is the real center of all this is that we trust in conversation, we trust in dialogue, we trust on the exchange of ideas.
Yeah, it was bridge the gap, but I think what Stefano refers to is this idea. I mean, obviously we are here in the middle of an exhibition, and as we speak, the choreography of the exhibition developed, based on the archive of Lucius Burkhardt and Cedric Price, developed by Tino Segal, Assad Raza, Philippe Pareno, Dominique Gonzalez-Förster, Liam Gillick, Carsten Höller, Kushong Ada, and Graham, many of the artists, Bow Wow, Atelier Bow Wow, continues. And that obviously has to do with what Richard Hamilton always said, quoting Duchamp, that with exhibitions it's about inventing a new rule of the game. And here, Herzog de Meuron, who were very involved from the very beginning with this project and will appear here in the marathon at the press conference in about half an hour. Herzog de Meuron actually co-curated this Lucius Burkhardt section, but they also came up with the display feature, which is these trolleys. And the idea of the trolleys shooting out when you come in the morning, the pavilion is empty, was very much their idea. And that, in 13 years ago, we started to think, could one actually apply the same logic to knowledge production? Could we start to come up with other ideas of conferences? It was before we did the marathon. So the idea was to have a house in, Kitakyushu with Akiko Miyake and have there kind of a situation where people couldn't escape and would just non-stop, have a conversation. There would be almost like chat rooms, but then there would be more formal conferences. There would be reading rooms, and people would inhabit this house somehow. And that led, of course, to many, many other experiments. It led to the experiment also in Sardinia, your knowledge festival, the Festark, right? That's another festival of knowledge.
This is a very good point, so this link between Kitakyushu and Sardinia. These are both islands, and I think that we have to work a lot on the notion of islands and on the notion of archipelago. But let me go back to Kitakyushu, because we know that bridge the gap means put together people from different language and discipline, but also sometimes it's something that happens through a time short circuit. And in that very moment when we were discussing in Kitakyushu the relation between science and art, I think you remember well that in Italy, in Genoa, the G8 of 2001 was starting, and it was happening was that in parallel with the public discussion we had in the CCA Kitakyushu, we started to have a discussion on what was happening in that very moment at 1,000 kilometers of distance in Italy, where a very strong riot movement was protesting against the geopolitics of the most powerful country of the world. And I think you remember well what happened in Genoa with one young Protestant who died and many victims of, let me say, the repression of the police. It was a very strong moment. And if I'm quoting this, it's because, in a way, this relation with geopolitics is something which is happening also here in Venice nowadays, in the Biennale, and also related to G8. And let me do a very personal exercise, who is going back to what's happened in Sardinia for the G8 of 2009. So 8 years before the moment that we were experienced at 1,000 kilometers of a distance in Kitiakusho, I was personally involved in the construction of the G8 site for the summit. It had to be hosted in Sardinia that Silvio Berlusconi, the Italian Prime Minister, decided to move some weeks before the starting of G8 to L'Aquila. Well, in the Cordelier, we are now, we've tried to describe that situation, the condition. And for me,
a film. Can you tell us about this film?
Yeah, it's Il a Becca, Lui Le Moine film. And was quite difficult for me also to be part of the description of something that has been a failure, has been a radical and successful. And the point was, for me, to be honest and not to speculate, and at the same time I think to introduce a question which is very important for me. This question is, why architects are so shy when they have to discuss their failures? Why we are normally so shy when we have to put on the table our fiascos? So why in the architectural field there is this distance between the possibility to use failures as, let me say, also process of learning, process of evolving of social. But why am I quoting this, going from Kitiakusho to La Maddalena through Genova, is because when we decided to do this film with Il a Becca and Lui Le Moine, the film is there, you can comment and react as you prefer. I was questioning to Rem this, so I started to think that it was necessary to start a conversation. And this is theTomorrow. theTomorrow is exactly this, is a web platform that every one of you could use if you want to introduce a conversation, you want to start a conversation. And the conversation is not simply a tweet exchange. Conversation is not simply a series of SMS. Conversation is not simply entering WhatsApp nowadays. Conversation means to have the time to think, to introduce a serious question, to wait for the answer, and to enlarge the group of thinkers that can be available to go ahead. So this is one of the starting points of theTomorrow. So for instance, in this case, I used the web platform to ask Rem Koolhaas to answer, and Rem was answering. And this is a starting of a conversation about the, let me say, this sort of absence of acceptation of failure in our disciplines, was at the moment very, very important.
Which is very Cedric Price, somehow. Can you talk a little bit about failure and Cedric? Because I think it's an interesting kind of connection.
Well, I'm not sure that it's about failure, the Cedric Price trajectory. I think it's more about fragility, and the awareness of the fragility has a condition of power. I think Cedric was from that point of view, so strong. So with a sort of lateral trajectory, if we compare with the trajectory of other absolutely more famous architects or thinkers of the 70s, of the 80s, and of the 90s too. But what was very important for me was that this capacity to develop a lateral thought about architecture and about daily life was, let me say, done by a sequence of very sensitive and strong interventions, but of many points of view. So I think that in that case, what Cedric decided to do was to avoid any kind of failure, because he decided to not enter really in the stage.
Now, two more questions. One thing more about tomorrow, because Amos before mentioned this necessity right now in Europe to kind of have more dialogue, and Amos mentioned this idea of more transnational dialogue, and obviously it leads us all back to Edouard Glissant, who says that the forces of globalization are more and more extreme, and Glissant coined this notion of mondialité, where he said we need a global dialogue which produces difference, and he says there is a very big danger that if we embrace globalization, the homogenizing forces prevail, but there is an even bigger danger if then, because of these forces of globalization, reject the dialogue, it leads to new nationalisms, exactly what we can observe now all over Europe, or in big parts of Europe, to say at least. And so Amos, picking up on that before, is obviously very important moment in Europe right now, and you launch this project tomorrow. So maybe it's important to talk a little bit more about this.
Let me answer quoting a sentence by Massimo Cacciari. Massimo Cacciari is a philosopher, is a Venetian philosopher, the mayor of the city. And well, talk about mayor in Venice in this day, it's quite delicate. Cacciari in 1997 wrote one of, in my opinion, one of his best books, was called Archipelago. And he was trying to describe Europe. And there is a sentence in which he says, archipelago means the irreducible plurality where the single elements cohabit just before they are inevitably isolated. And this is not simply a metaphor, because what Massimo Cacciari is trying to suggest us, that we need a conversation. We need a conversation. We start from the acceptance of the diversity of every single element that it comes to be part of a dialogue. And this is the reason we are not so much interested in narration nowadays, and we are much more interested in a conversation. We're interested in a conversation because narration is like a way to hidden our individualities and to share a common perspective. We think that it's much more fertile nowadays to start with the complete explicitation of our diversity, and with this possibility to produce an exchange of identities. And this is theTomorrow. So theTomorrow is a web journal. The editorial staff of theTomorrow will be a simple support for a conversation that start around a question, around a project, around an idea. And the process is a viral process, so as I told before, is an exposed conversation, public in this way, but not open. So it's not Facebook, it's not a social network. And the people who will be part of the conversation could involve other thinkers. So you could be involved in a conversation only with someone who's asking you to be part of a conversation.
Now, a last question. I wanted us to talk about citizen. Because in some kind of way, listening to Amos and listening to you, I all of a sudden think that actually this project Citizen is maybe relevant again for Europe in 2014. And it's one of our unrealized projects. It's a project very much inspired by you, Stefano, which sort of after Cities on the Move, after Utopia Station, we were thinking, what could be another laboratory exhibition, another kind of exhibition format as an experiment. And you mentioned a lot this idea of the perceptive band in relation to identity. We looked at Germany at that time, we looked at the Ruhrgebiet and how people move. And it was a whole project actually about identity as a perceptive band. Can you maybe remember the vision of Citizen? Because I think it's kind of a very interesting unrealized exhibition we should maybe reactivate.
Yeah. I think that everything started in the Stuttgart airport. We were together, and at a certain moment we were discussing strongly about what to do in the Ruhr region. And at a certain moment Hans had my passport, and he used my passport to leave for Milano. And I was there with Hans' ID, and I was trying to use his ID to leave for Paris. And at a certain moment we understood that why not? Why not? It's possible, I think, to not simply put in sequence, but accumulate different experience and different trajectory and different identities. And this is, in a way, part of our lives. If we simply think to the accumulation and superimposition of identities that the condition of immigrants in our cities are accumulating in the last decades in Europe, you understand very well that the notion of citizenship has to be completely re-elaborated. So it's quite only partially to do with the place where you are born and the place where you live. And that's a lot to do with a sequence of experience that you have exchanged or you have shared with other people, with other part of your families, with the people that you meet in your daily life and experience. So that was the starting point of a project that was interrupted in a way, but like happened with a project interrupted, like happened with the books that you don't read, they work a lot. Because they are empty space, but finally you go around and around, and just because you have not read it, you are much more obsessioned by their content. So I think there are like sort of black empty voids that are extremely fertile in our life.
Stefano, thank you very, very much. Thank you all. And now we do have a 10-minute coffee break. It's the moment for the coffee break. Coffee, coffee, coffee.
And after the press conference.